Okay, so on the show today, Dr. Stephen Gilligan. So he was someone I was really impressed with at the conference, came super highly recommended to me before that. I've enjoyed chatting to him since. PhD, I believe, from Stanford, one of the original NLP students, really very well thought of in that world, super experienced trainer, coach, organizational guy, author of a number of books, does really interesting somatic work, combining that with NLP and coaching. So Stephen, welcome.
Hi, Mark. Great to be here.
Hey, where are you in the world today?
Where I am at home, I'm actually in Encinitas, California, which is 30 minutes up the coast from San Diego, little beach town. I can see the ocean from here. You know, we grow surfers and yoga studios and poinsettia, the red Christmas flowers.
I'm in Mexico today, but
You are?
just
Oh, where?
had a 2-hour massage. I'm in Tulum, Mexico, so it's you might,
There you go.
yeah,
Wow. Mexican culture is really big here. It's probably close to half the population, and I really like it a lot.
And how did you get interested in NLP, coaching, the somatic work you do now? Tell us a little bit about your story, Steve.
Well, it was a dark and stormy night. I grew up in San Francisco, Mark, and I grew up in a very intense, violent Irish Catholic alcoholic family. I think I had this really deep connection to, you might call it trance. Of course, I didn't have that word then. I think I had it both from just, it's who I am, and the sense of feeling a little bit more connected to the other world than this world. Growing up with alcoholism, kind of pushes that in a certain way. I went to a Jesuit all boys high school right on the edge of the Haight-Ashbury district. And that was in 1968 to 72. So sex, drugs, rock and roll was really happening. And then I went to University of California at Santa Cruz for my undergraduate work, about an hour and a half down the coast from San Francisco. I kind of struggled for a year and a half. I dropped out. I went back, kind of was doing my Irish roots of a lot of alcohol and drugs and working in a steel factory in the middle of the Oakland ghettos on the midnight shift. I had a very close to suicide. And out of that, it was a pretty amazing experience. I realized that this voice in my head that was saying, I don't want to live this life anymore. I don't want to live this life, was really saying, I don't want to live, sort of my tradition, my family and cultural tradition of depression and alcohol. And when I finally released to that, and this big letting go, and I saw the campus at Santa Cruz, and I called them up. I said, I want to come back. They said, tomorrow's the last day to register. I drove in my Volkswagen van. And they said, I registered, and they said, now you got to pick classes. And I said, well, where's the, show me the courses. And they showed it, and I almost sort of went to it like a Ouija board. And there was a course by this guy, Gregory Bateson, called Steps to an Ecology of Mind. And then there was this course by this guy, John Grinder, called Political Economy of the United States. Grinder at that time was kind of a violent Marxist. And that's how I started getting into where I am professionally. Grinder had just met Bandler, and I was in their very first groups that they did together. Through that, I met Milton Erickson. After Santa Cruz, I went to Stanford for my PhD in psychology. I had a very sharp break from the NLP people. I really did Milton Erickson's work, and that's really evolved, through 4 or 5 generations over the last 40 plus years.
Okay, so let's start with really NLP. So most people have heard of it today, but actually in the embodiment world, people might not have experienced it. The average, say, yoga teacher out there might have kind of heard of it, and it sometimes has a bit of a dodgy reputation, actually.
Well, and deservedly so.
Yeah, when people said, "Hey, you should look up Stephen Gilligan, he's an NLP guy," I was like, "Oh, really?" And then actually, I was really, pleased with what I saw. But it's yeah, like, how would you describe like what NLP is, and maybe make a distinction between the dodgy and the non-dodgy side of it?
Well, I don't want to spend too much time because I do not in any way identify myself as an NLP person. When I left Santa Cruz in 1977, I was alluding to, I had a very sharp break from those guys. I now have, part of what I do involves a professional partnership with Robert Dilts, who's kind of one of the luminaries in NLP. And Robert and I were university buddies, way back when. At this point, 50 years into it, there's no single NLP, just like there's no single Ericksonian work. But the stuff I do with Robert is not about programming. It's not about building a better mousetrap. It's not about being clever. It's not about manipulation. But it's really about looking at how people use mind, body, social filters to create their reality and to create their experience. That's not unique to NLP, but it was, one of the fundamental things. NLP, stayed pretty much in the verbal cognitive realm.
Mm-hmm.
And particularly with my connection with Milton Erickson, who I'm much more identified with. He was the great psychiatrist, great, generative hypnotherapist of the 20th century. And he talked about, going into this other intelligence deep in the body and through the body. That was really the basis for living creatively and healing and transforming and so forth. So I don't know, I could say more, but to say I'm not.
Let's move on to your stuff and what's good about your stuff. Often the NLP crowd, they mention the body, but they don't do much with it. And you are someone that I see, this body seems central to what you do, right?
Yeah, I think, it's the first intelligence that we have as humans. This kind of basic idea that I sort of work on is that consciousness is creating reality. And it's creating reality through filters, sort of like stained glass windows, if you will. You got the divine light as it hits those lattices or those matrices. On the other side, unfolds a reality. And in the generative change work, we talk about three main filters: the somatic filter, the cognitive filter, and what we call the field, which has many different, like the social field or your ancestral field. And so what we're looking at is how consciousness moves through those different filters, how easy it is to get them locked, which means that you're cut off, and it means that you're going to just repeat the same old, same old, same old. And then what we look to do is how to create this learning space so you can reopen the filters and reconnect with them in this very fluid, generative way. Mm-hmm. It starts with the body. That's our base.
Right. So we're getting a distorted view of reality, and that's creating a kind of repetitive future. That seems to be the case, right? So if I'm walking around Mexico, my embodiment is impacting how everything lands on me, what possibilities I see, what relationships I have. If I'm stuck in that lens, that filtering, that embodiment, then I'm just going to keep recreating stuff.
Walking around Mexico is going to probably significantly influence what reality you're creating than if you're walking around London. So that would be an example of a field filter.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. It's interesting. I do notice that, actually, having been here for a few weeks now, I'm like, oh, I've shifted, and my team say, oh, you're a little bit different. There's a shifting just from being here and being around it.
Well, being American, I only speak really English. I say English and Mammalese, but I talk to my more international friends, and I've heard so many times, wow, when I'm speaking English or when I'm speaking German or when I'm speaking Mandarin, it's like I have a different reality that I'm tuning to,
Mm, mm,
so the culture and the language, and basically, Mark, I think that's what psychology is studying, is it's studying filters.
mm.
So it's like, okay, you're in this social context versus that one. You're in this
Mm.
somatic state. The research I did at Stanford, which was 30 plus experiments, used hypnosis to train people to have these content-free emotional states.
Okay, hang on. Content-free emotional state. So that you're experiencing an emotion, but you're not associating it like, hey, it was because this happened, but that made me happy or whatever.
Exactly.
Uh-huh.
So generally it was anger, sadness, happiness. And then we looked at how when you were in those states, we looked at a number of different cognitive performances, like autobiographical memory, what you remember from your childhood. Give people stories or have them watch videos. What do you notice? What's the meaning? What do you remember? You ask people to make predictions about their future. And the emotional state is a filter that significantly influences all that.
Right, right.
So there are many, many, many different filters.
Yeah. And you've actually, why don't we touch on the Irish one? Because we both grew up in Irish alcoholic households. We talked about this before. We have quite a lot of Irish listeners. Like, can you use that as an example of how that could be filtering and how that could be, dictating our futures if we're not careful?
Well, every filter has equal capacity to be constructive and destructive. I mean, that's one of the core points. So the Irish culture, if we were just to tune into that, I mean, the leprechaun twinkle, I think we still have those Celtic little spirits. I truly think so.
Mm.
The fact that the Roman Empire never reached Ireland was really significant. So you've got the literature, you've got the poetry. I was reading about James Joyce this morning. You've got the beauty of the land, you've got the beauty of the connection. But you also have, some of these, in every filter, there's shadow places.
Mm-hmm.
So, I'm these days, as I continue on my journey, my connection to my family, generations, and to my culture is more significant when I look at these deep places of depression inside of me,
Mm-hmm.
or these deep places of how alcohol was culturally a favorite way to try to meet these core needs. So
Yes.
those aren't so much, I mean, those are parts of the cultural frame, but they represent the parts of any frame that you entered into some difficult experience, and then you had to shut down, and then you had to disconnect. And so now that shadow place is operating independently of your awareness, and it will show up, in a lot of different ways.
I was noticing an Irish one around authority and rules around COVID. That there's a lot of rules and regulations. And you can do this and you can't do that, and you have to wear a mask. And I noticed this part of me that was just habitually rebelling against rules, irrespective of the science and the common sense and what research I'd done. I mean, there might be a reason to rebel against some of them, but this was very habitual. And then I just I caught myself doing it. I was like, okay, there's some Irish thing playing out here around authority and rules that maybe isn't actually so helpful in Mexico in 2021,
Well, as I say, I think all of those things, they're double-edged. Everything is double-edged. And so I think the important thing, we talk about the filters as sort of preeminent
Mm-hmm.
in whatever you experience as reality. But there's something even more important than the filters, which is the human presence that's holding the filters. And when the human presence, when you have a mindful presence, then whatever is in the filter contains all these very interesting resources. But when I connect to these filters based on my history, if I check out, and a lot of it's automatic.
Yeah, that's what I noticed. It was automatic, and I had to kind of catch it almost.
Yeah, it's the human disconnection that is the problem. It's never the experience itself. It's not sadness, it's not rage, it's not despair, it's not suicidal thoughts, it's not homicidal thoughts. It's the human relationship with them. And of course, this is not new to this work. I mean, it was the core of Milton Erickson's work.
Yeah, you mentioned hypnosis, trance states, and obviously Erickson's associated with that. I mean, again, to some of the sort of somatic community listening to this might be new, or they might be using them, in a kind of yoga way or whatever, but not be aware that that's what's, they might not have the same language for it, let's say. So do you want to say a little bit about what do you mean by trance? Because it sounds like, some guy holding up the pocket watch and, you're feeling very sleepy, What do you mean?
There are those two words, hypnosis and trance. And trance, I think, is the world's oldest profession. I mean, it's a core human experience that activates any time that something new has to happen, or any time that you need to affirm some deeper identity. And hypnosis is sort of a Johnny-come-lately. It's a Western tradition that's been used to try to work within that trance state. I think for the most part, it's a terrible tradition, because it's, sort of like neurolinguistic programming. It's this idea that to go into trance, you lose control, somebody else takes over, somebody else programs you with what you should think or what you should do. And I think, that's obviously the problem, not the solution. So
just a step back there, Stephen. Tell me what trance is again, then. How do you define trance?
Okay. We've got these two worlds. We could say there's this sort of pre-conscious, pre-external reality, quantum dreamer world. When we're in dreams, that's the quantum unconscious. When an artist is in an artistic state, you say, where did that come from? It's coming from more of that quantum field of dreams and imaginations. Then, and if we were just in that, we would just be space cases, right? So we've got this other world, which we might call the classical world, where we kind of step out and there are social rules and, the way things work, and time and space and certain order and so forth. Creativity is really on the bridge between those two worlds. If you get all in the external reality, you're a bureaucrat. Mm-hmm. If you get all in the dreamer world, you're psychotic. But all of the new stuff is coming from the creative unconscious, that quantum world. So what trance is taking your awareness and moving it into that dreamer world where you can go anywhere from anywhere. There are no limits, and anything can turn into anything. So, that's like in a dream. If I say, well, I was a dream and I was an eagle and then I became a snake, and you wouldn't hospitalize me. You'd say, wow, I'm jealous. That sounds like an amazing dream. So when we need to shift our deep frames, we first need to go into a place where everything is a variable. So for example, say I'm struggling with some experience in my body, some relationship to food or pain or anxiety, or I hate my body. How do we create that? We create them through brain maps, brain, mind, body maps. It's not that your body, you only have one possible body. You have an infinite number of possible bodies. So what we do in trance is we say, let's take a step back. Let's go into sort of a safe, open place where I can feel I have 10,000 different possible bodies. And then I can feel, oh, I could have my body this way, or could experience it that way, or could experience it. So we begin to explore. And then for what Erickson said, you can find that connection that best fits your present needs and your present capacities.
I want to relate this to listeners to the average yoga class. Like I was trying to figure out, why do I like going to yoga classes? Because I know all the moves, I know all the stretches, you know, and unless the teacher's very
I go
good,
every day. I'm home here in Encinitas. I haven't gone, you know, to the pandemic, but yeah, yoga. I've been doing yoga since I was 17.
And I was thinking, in a yoga class, the way the teacher speaks and the ritual and these kind of movements, you are going into a kind of trance state.
Totally.
And also you're disrupting the normal body patterns through, you know, stretching and strength and tension. And you know, I was quite aware that often I have great ideas after a yoga class, or some sort of creativity or new perspective. I go, you know what, I don't need to look at it that way. Or, you know what, I'm going to treat that staff member differently.
That's it. That's it.
You're disrupted, right? Your body's disrupted, and you've been in this nice.
Yeah.
And I really value it to the point where I will go across town and risk catching COVID to go to a yoga class rather than do one at home on my own, you know. And I know, you know, doing the stretches myself, because the sort of increased trance of doing it in a group and doing it with the teacher leading it.
Well, that's the base that we need for replenishment, rejuvenation, change. And, you know, I haven't, unfortunately, I haven't been able to go to yoga, but I still have my California hot tub in the back.
Softening the muscles.
It's my last conscious act of the day. I'm serious.
Nice.
Around midnight, I go and I sit in the hot tub, and I have my best ideas there.
Yes, I have a very hot bubble bath every single night normally in England. As the last thing I do at the end of a day. I wonder if that's not a sort of alcohol substitute on some level, like a, you know, positive.
Or alcohol is a substitute for those natural experiences.
You know? Right, but us both having that sort of alcoholic Irish background, it's
well, it's a basic human need. You have to go into that state periodically. There is a neurological, social requirement for you to go into that state of letting go. And, you know, the thing about human beings is that we can satisfy any needs in an infinite number of ways.
Right.
And so, you know, I learned, for example, I haven't drank any alcohol for 15 years. Mm-hmm. And I had this idea, well, it never interfered with my work. I was never a fall down drunk. So I didn't have any problem, but I looked forward every night to 1, 2, and 15 years ago, when I was going through a very painful divorce, sometimes 3 glasses of California white Chardonnay. And I felt unhappy and unhealthy. And so I told myself, stop drinking alcohol. And I got my Irish finger signals. So I thought, okay, well, you know, what we do in the work is we say, whatever negative behavior that's persistent, it's obviously giving you something really, really
meeting important. A need, right? It's an addiction is like you've got fixed on one strategy to meet a need.
Yeah. So, and I think the important thing is you can't really understand that or change that from here, because it's deeper in the somatic consciousness. So you have to do something that allows you to let go of, oh, it's this, and this is good, and this is bad, and it looks like this, and this is the meaning. You don't know. You know, that part of you is completely independent from your ego. You know, your ego thinks, oh, this is who I am, this is the way the world is, and that other part of you is like, no. You know, there's something really so important that you're not attending to. I'm going to do it myself through whatever. Could be anxiety, it could be depression, it could be staying up all night, it could be alcohol, could be, you know, unhealthy sex, whatever. So those things you cannot understand, and any attempt to try to change them from here usually throws fuel on the fire. So
Okay,
that's where
what do you do? What do you
trance
do?
comes in.
So,
Sorry?
so if someone finds himself in a pattern that's not so helpful, it might be an addiction. Like I have one at the moment that I stay up later than is smart watching YouTube videos. I'm saying to myself, right, it's time to go to bed, and then I just don't, and I'm just watching YouTube. It's some
Well, you
sort
and
of
I
thing.
can have a support group on that.
I mean, I'm using that as an example because it's not too hardcore, it's not too extreme, but it's it's one
No,
of my
I get it. I hear you. Well,
but I find myself going, why am I doing this? Why am I doing this?
and a lot, you just don't know. I
Yeah.
mean, you're talking about the fundamental limits of your verbal mind. Your verbal mind is basically a politician and a manager. It's trying to do and say anything to get reelected. And it only can rearrange the chairs on the Titanic. And I don't say that cynically. I'm just trying to be descriptive to say, I mean, where do you see trance situated traditionally in cultures at times of identity transition? So um, a birth, a death, a marriage, not so much divorce, because that's kind of new, an illness, children leaving home, a graduation, a retirement. Those are the places where you have the cultural trance rituals, right? You put on different clothes, you usually got some music, I used to blow the smoke as an altar boy. And it's designed to get you out of your social, rational mind and into that quantum world, because that's where you think of it like an ocean. And by quantum, partly, I mean, every pattern is there, but it's there as what in quantum work you call superposition, which it has 10,000 ways that it can express itself. So what does trust look like? What does self-protection look like? What does relaxation look like? In that quantum unconscious, it's got infinite possibilities. You have to choose one to step out in the world and act. So we think of it then, I go into this place of just open possibility. I choose one, I step back out in the world, I try it out. But now when I get feedback, that's not working. Like I'm drinking alcohol, or I'm staying up all night, and that just seems to be automatic. Then I need to take a step back, go into my yoga or my hot tub or my buddy Robert Dilts runs an hour and a half a day. And he says that's where he works everything out.
Everybody has something, right?
Everybody has to have something.
They have to. If you don't, do it in a healthy way. Yeah.
If you don't have it,
yeah,
in a healthy way, that's when addictions assert themselves.
I like that you related that to behavioral possibly, because people might understand addiction as like alcohol to relax or something, but also like you talked about like say strategies for safety. People have almost like a behavioral addiction, right? Like this is how I find safety, by being defensive, or one in Mexico I see a lot is sort of being nice and placating. It's kind of a cultural addiction for safety. And it was, and an Irish one's slightly different, a Russian one's definitely different than a Mexican one, but they're addictions to behaviors to establish safety, we could say.
Well, I think all the creativity is organized around these basic needs. And so you have then cultural ways that you do it, or family ways, or individual ways. But they're all expressing basic needs. So if you want to change it, you have to stop being hostile to it. And you have to say, I'm sure that that we have these sort of 4 mantras. That's interesting. I'm staying up watching YouTubes, even though I don't want to, or I'm doing whatever. I tried to change it, saying, stop it. Didn't work. My plan B is take a step back, one of Erickson's favorite phrases was, I don't know. Starting with him, said, I don't know, but I'm very curious to discover. So something's going on with me, that something is like compulsively doing this. Let's create a space, a safe space, where I can just open. I don't have to figure it out. Oh, it means this, or I have to do that. But what if? Chill out. Go down to somatic, open up to this space, create a space where you can welcome. There's a part of me that's watching YouTube, or the part of me that's drinking wine every night, or part of me that's whatever, and welcome it into that space. And then you realize it's got an outer form of compulsive action, but it's got this inner presence of I need. And so how could you do that? Well, we do something called somatic modeling.
Yeah, can I pause a minute, Stephen? Because there's two groups of people listening to this. There's the podcasters and the YouTubers. Now, the YouTubers are getting so much more because you're saying step back and you're coming back in your body. You're doing gestures often down and opening. You're doing all these beautiful somatic gestures. Like when you're talking about this theoretically, you're not, when you use the words, you're really moving your body and shifting the somatic when you talk about step back and open up. And I'm just aware the podcast listeners, as opposed to the viewers, are missing that. And that seems like a critical part here.
It is the key relationship. What you're saying and thinking up in your head, and the way it's connecting somatically. There's a guy you probably know, Eugene Genlin, who did the focusing work, and that came out of he was working with Carl Rogers at the University of Chicago, and he did this 30-year research project on what best predicts sustainable therapeutic change. And I'm sure it is completely 100% the case in coaching. And he found the best prediction is if when you're talking about something or verbalizing something, you can feel somatic resonance connected with it. That's the winning ticket.
And it might seem like a detail, but like watching you do it as you talk through the process you're verbally describing,
it's the key.
It's critical.
And that's what something like yoga gives you. You say it another way, that you have these two very different types of intelligence or thinking. The coarse one is thinking and acting with muscle tension. What am I? Oh my God. So, nothing will happen from that. The second is what might be called nerve awareness, which is what the Chinese call qi, what your prana in yoga. And you feel in any creative performance, you feel, I got to get in a state where I can feel something flowing through me. So it's a type of relaxation where you're not drooling. You're actually in a very high performance state. But that nerve awareness, information, energy flowing through the nerves as subtle awareness, that is the key. That's what yoga teaches you. That's what meditation teaches you. That's what Ericksonian trance teaches you, is how to get into those mind-body states where nerve awareness is the primary way of thinking.
This is nice. I like this a lot. There's a simplicity to it, which I'm enjoying. And maybe you could give an example of someone you've worked with lately, or a kind of classic case to kind of bring this to kind of personalize what we're talking about a bit.
Yeah, so let's see. We were just doing a Hero's Journey workshop in Barcelona virtually. And so let's say, I say, tell me what you want, okay? And I say, I really want to have more positive intimacy in my marriage. Okay, great. So tell me about what you think that should be like. And immediately, Mark, I can guarantee you that you will see muscular constriction and breathing inhibition as a person talks about their elusive goal.
So like, I can't get intimacy with my wife, and they're tensing up. Or
that's even, that would be sort of a dramatic form.
Yeah,
but,
yeah.
You know, I'm sorry for the people who are just an auditory, but maybe you can describe
No,
it.
it's good. It encourages them to come to YouTube. That's good. That's
So, what you see what happened in my shoulders right now?
You tensed up a little bit in your trapezius.
Yeah, and you see what happened in my forehead?
You wrinkled between your eyes.
That is constipation.
Okay.
That's constipation. If you try to think of creating something new and you're constipated,
Right.
there's no way out. There's no way out. So you say, oh, isn't that interesting? So I usually say to people these days, I just want to share with you, I'm not being critical. I can't help but notice as soon as you start thinking about that, this happens. And we try to make it like a playful, simple thing in the conversation. So now let's say, if you really want to make your dream come true, we got to chill out first, go into what we call coach, centered, open, aware, positively connected, hospitable. So now I will ask, Mark, when you really need to connect to yourself, with yourself, what works really well for you? You know, you said yoga, for example, could be for another person, gardening, could be cooking, could be, you know, I hang out with my dog. So just step into that state and tell me what happens as you enter that state. You will start to feel that sense of the pleasure, the well-being, and we're saying enhanced creativity comes from finding that state. So person says, okay, I'm having some intimacy challenges in my marriage. And I say, well, as you talk about it, I can see why you're pretty constipated. Let's get into this state. Okay, I'm thinking about working in the garden. You know, tell me about that. You know, tell me the sensual images. Tell me what it's like. Slow it down. Every little image, let it drop all the way down from, you know, through your vertical axis, and just notice, almost like dropping. Oh, there's my pink roses, and just breathe and let that go to happen. Tell me what happens there. I feel totally relaxed, open. Great. Now we have to maintain that while we go through this pattern that we want to change. So the best thing is simplify. Don't use that many words. You say you want better intimacy in your marriage. Great. I see that. I totally support that. I'm going to ask you to ask your body to show me and show you what would be a simple, what we call somatic model of intimacy. And right now you see one hand's going to my heart, one hand's extending out to my partner, and I'm feeling them. Okay. What you will then see is that a lot of people have that pathway booby trapped. They have this sense of, if I open to intimacy, something terrible will happen. And so what you'll see, if you see it, is as I start to open, showing you with my somatic model of reaching out to my partner, you'll start to see these, what we call neuromuscular lock. That's where the game's over. When you're going to neuro, these brain images, muscular, freezing, contraction, you're basically, you know, you have what Freud called repetition compulsion. Nothing gets in, nothing gets out. So we're saying, okay, my job is to help you get into that creative mind-body state and make sure you stay there at every moment of your process. Because I'm really confident that if you do that, you'll figure it out. That makes sense?
Yeah. I sort of intuitively, as a coach, see people move in and out of more and less helpful
Yeah. And
states and
so,
modes. And
you're really trying to see that everything you're experiencing, you're actively creating. So the person says, well, I feel anxious. So the question is, how do you create that? And we're not asking from just a head place. You say, so something inside is, show me a somatic model for anxiety. Because if you were just sitting in the hot tub, your hot tub place or your yoga place, I mean, one of the reasons people do it is because it allows them to release from the neuromuscular lock.
it's a big shift from states of something that happened to us to states that are something we do. And yes, there are conditions like hot tubs help for certain states, right? But that is a big shift in perspective.
That's it. So you find it first in situations that are low stress. So I'm in the hot tub. I don't have human beings around me. I've just got my dog. So in that state, I can feel good. Or at a yoga class, I can feel good. Or, whatever, when I'm listening to my favorite music, I can feel good. If you just have it in those places, it turns out to be a sort of like a ghetto, a drug.
Okay, because you've got to go do that thing. You've got to go do yoga. You've got to go, whatever the thing is.
Well, you're saying I have to withdraw from the regular world to feel good. And that's what makes it, what Joseph Campbell in The Hero's Journey said, you can either live in the village or you can live in the wasteland, or you can do the journey of consciousness. And the wasteland means that I step out of the village, I step out of the mainstream because it's hypocrites, it's bullshit, I can't handle it. And I go, and whether it's I smoke marijuana or I just go to yoga classes all day, you're really stepping away from full participation in the world.
Yeah.
So now the question is that connection that you have in those positive places, how can you maintain that connection when you go into the challenging places? That's I think where people's lives really start taking off.
Yeah, that's definitely a trap in the somatics world to want to be on retreat the whole time or want to be in yoga the whole time and not see it as, well, what does yoga bring the rest of my life? What does my conscious dance bring the rest of my life? How do I, rather than have this very special state in conscious dance, how do I actually bring that to the world?
And you see, I mean, the world has fallen pretty far, pretty fast in the last 30 years. And, you look at, wow, who was in charge during this time? And it was really our generation. I don't know how old you are, but my generation, it was on our watch that things have pretty much collapsed. And I think part of it is, I said I grew up in the Haight-Ashbury district, and, I was totally I lived at Esalen, the New Age place and Big Sur. And I think we realized we want to get out of the rat race, and have this really positive, connected life where we feel, wow, it's so much more than what mainstream reality says. But in doing that, the best and the brightest, I think, have stopped being citizens.
Right. That's an interesting perspective. So the people that had the heart and the interest in psychology and all these things, they extracted themselves from the decision making, from politics, from money, from the world, right? And then
so.
who was left to run the show?
Yeah, and so I think we're facing that crisis right now, where we realize that we either integrate those two worlds, that inner world of well-being and connection and positivity and infinite possibilities, and we also step into the world and realize we have to do a lot of work as citizens at the same time. So all these things, I mean, the environment is hanging by a thread. The relationship between men and women, collectively is in a real crisis. The Black Lives Matter stuff, particularly here in the United States. So I think what many of us have been doing for some years in terms of preparing this state of staying in a creative state, a positive well-being, it's been a preparation.
Hmm.
Now we have to bring it into the world.
It does seem to me the younger generation are more about integration. I do see, conscious activism and conscious entrepreneurship,
Yeah, I agree.
somatics and activism, the environment. You do see this much, much more, I think, in people sort of younger than me. And, that seems like a very positive reintegration kind of stage. And maybe it's
Yeah.
just generationally, it's like.
No, I'm really excited about, I mean, we're seeing on the one hand this horrible stuff. I mean, I'm American. I've never been more, embarrassed and ashamed to be American in the last 4 years. And finally, we've got Trump out. But we see this incredible stuff, and now we have to move it in a different way. And I see this younger generation, some really good stuff happening.
Mm-hmm. Well, starting to move towards wrap up here. I mean, are there any kind of misunderstandings around coaching and all your kind of area that you'd like to kind of clear up? I don't know where this question is coming from, but just intuitively, I want to ask you: is there anything you want to kind of maybe be a bit cantankerous around, or just say, "Hey, this is something I want to put out there," and say that's not the case?
Well, I guess a couple things. One is, I think we really need to do this bridge between individual change and collective community. And, I'm obviously, a lot of people feel that way. Coaching, I see coaching as a response to the first generation of therapy, where, you had to focus on problems in the past and analysis, and the therapist as being in a, one-up position. And coaching, I think, really came after 30 years of the humanistic psychology, and said, no, it's all about resources and the future and positivity, and it's a collaborative relationship. And that's great. I think what happens in coaching is that people think you can only think positive. You can only have positive things. And one of the kind of, I think, unique things about what Dilts and I have done, which we call generative coaching, is talking about how transformation and awakening comes equally from the joys of life and the suffering of life. And we're seeing that if you are a human being, and the more interesting a life you want to have, the more demons are going to confront you. Isn't that great to know? There's so much suffering that no matter how enlightened you are, people are going to die, people will betray you, relationships will end, you have illness, the usual suspects. I think what we need to do is really learn how to have this positive, creative, skillful relationship to the sufferings of life, so that we're not so one-sided and dualistic.
Beautiful.
That's what I learned from Milton Erickson. He was saying everything that life gives you is an opportunity.
Stephen, I've very much enjoyed this. I can't believe the time has gone. It's really,
well, there were two Irishmen that walked into a bar.
Yeah. We could talk for another 5 hours, I'm sure. But I mean, I'm really quite discerning when it comes to coach trainers. I have many guests on, and some of the guests I interview don't really know their area, or can't really decide if they're any good or not. But I'll be definitely coming to one of your trainings at some point in the future. It's almost like a concern that listeners might underrate what you've been saying, because it's so simple. But I wanted to say, for the record, as someone who's really quite discerning in this area, that I've very much enjoyed this. And I rate what you do very highly.
Well, StephenGilligan.com. There's other websites, but that's always a place, you know, we have
That was my next question.
lots of stuff to see. Yeah.
There's a couple of good podcasts out there from you that I listen to that people can catch as well as this one. And yes, Stephen with a PH, right? PH.
Yeah, PH, yeah.
Gillig.
Yeah, that's the Catholic spelling, Mark. Yeah.
That's the obviously the real spelling, not the Satanistic V.
I was born on St. Stephen's Martyr's Day.
St. Stephen's, eh? Okay.
December 26th. You know, my mom went into labor at the Christmas dinner, and she thought it was the potatoes, but it turned out to be me.
You
know,
human potatoes. That's how I look at the Irish. We're high carbohydrate, earthy food.
Well, it's all part of that British plot, you know.
Stephen, this has been a pleasure. Do you have a kind of closing message about the body? That's sometimes how we finish these. Do you have a closing message about the body for the listeners?
Well, you know, the Buddhists like to say, when you've been given a human life, you have hit the jackpot. Do you know how lucky you are? And it all starts with this miracle of embodiment. I mean, you know, I remember Jung in his autobiography, Memories, Dreams, and Reflections, has a chapter on his connection with the dead. And it was very interesting because he said, you know, he was really surprised that connecting with the dead, they couldn't do anything. It's like they were aware, but they couldn't change anything because they needed a human body and a human life. So they're really hoping that their people in the outside world could make the change. So we have this amazing body, but we have this self-awareness that can disconnect and shut down the body. Wake up every day. Wake up.
We're incredibly lucky, and I even if I've just entered a higher tax bracket, and I hadn't thought about that for the whole hour, Stephen. We talked about it just before we press record. Hadn't thought about it for a half hour.
So now you know, Mark, that when you go to talk to your tax consultant, you make sure you have that yoga.
I'll be open, creative, down and open.
I'm sincere.
No, right? Why not? Yeah. Why not? If we can't take it to the accountant and all, you know, those kind of places, what's the point? Yeah. Okay, Stephen, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Mark. Thanks to all of you. Take good care.